So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah Cable and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the Interdisciplinary Programs in the Office of the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Faculty Development. It's my honor to welcome you to the second session of our 8-part series on interprofessional mindfulness. I'll briefly introduce our speaker and then we'll begin today's activity. Housekeeping items, today's session is being recorded. We know not everyone could join us and we want to make sure the session is available for review as you continue your mindfulness practice. The chat is also being recorded and you're welcome to enter notes or questions there. As with any Zoom meeting, we ask that you mute your mic when not speaking. We may mute mics for you to prevent any sound feedback during the presentation. This seminar series is a result of ongoing research and interest by Dr. Gerry Ibay. He has over 10 years of healthcare experience in multiple roles, organizations, and geographies. Prior to academia, he was a manager of clinical information systems for New York Presbyterian Hospital, where he successfully managed a $20 million grant to develop health information exchanges to facilitate care coordination between the hospital and community-based patient-centered medical homes. Dr. Ibay has served in a variety of roles for Bon Secours Health System, including as a Vice President of Strategy and Philanthropy, leading departments through strategic change, and with role and staff responsibilities spanning multiple states. He now brings his practical experience to the classroom as Vice Chair and Assistant Professor. Gerry has received a Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Richmond, earning a double major in Leadership Studies and Speech Communication. He has also completed a dual graduate degree, receiving an MHA from Virginia Commonwealth University and a JD from the University of Richmond School of Law. And with that, please join me in welcoming our facilitator for today's event, Dr. Gerry Ibay.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so we will get started here with a question. I'm going to bring up my, this is our session 2. In the first session, we provided an overview of this series, Interprofessional Mindfulness, and today we're going to focus on solo mindfulness. So for those of you who weren't able to attend last week or those who are joining remotely for the first time this week, we'll just start off with a quick overview again of what is mindfulness. So I will open it up to the group and let's hear your thoughts. What is mindfulness? And I want to be able to see you all. Okay, but can you now see my screen or you see my Zoom screen now?
I see your Zoom screen.
Okay, all right, well then maybe I just can't see you guys while we're doing this. Okay, let me bring this back then. Okay, Sarah, maybe since I can't see the Zoom screen, if somebody's entering anything in chat, would you mind reading it off?
So we have Ashley has input being intentionally present in the moment. And Kay says awareness of the moment.
Yeah, very good. So one of the things we talked about last week is Jon Kabat-Zinn is widely considered the person who brought mindfulness to America many years ago. He's the founder of the mindfulness-based stress reduction, and that's how he defines mindfulness. He says it's really bringing awareness to the present moment and having a sense of non-judgment. So it's a present focus, it's intentionality. So bringing your awareness, bringing your focus to the present, and having a sense of non-judgment. With that in mind, what we've laid out for, one of the things I mentioned is that even scholars don't necessarily agree on what mindfulness is. For some people, mindfulness is movements, things like yoga or Pilates or walking meditation, even mindful washing dishes, mindful eating. And for some other people, they focus on the more stillness aspects of mindfulness like meditation, mind-body scans. And so when you hear mindfulness, that could mean many different types of things. And so for this series, what I am focusing on are 3 dynamic relationships. And that's what's on the screen right now. So we have this melding or merging of mind and body. And it's really taking this concept of a Western mind with an Eastern body. And especially here in America, so many times when we're dealing with issues or we're dealing with a problem, it can be all kind of in our head, and we're trying to rationalize things and we're trying to think through things. And a thing that Eastern traditions tell us is that you really have to get out of your head. But you have to do both. You have to think through things critically, but you also have to see how they're embodied physically. The second dynamic that we're looking at here is causing and allowing. And I had that example last time about the golf swing being something that you cause to happen, but you also have to allow certain things to happen. So then in that aspect, it's kind of this dynamic between setting up structures. So there are things you need to do to be mindful or to mindfully react to situations. You have to have plans, you have to have frameworks, you have to have models that you use, but at the same time, you also have to recognize that so many things are outside of your control, and it's really not even up to you. If you think about professional athletes, they're never perfect, even though they spend their entire lives learning how to shoot a free throw, for example. Hardly everyone, even the best free throw shooters, shoot 90%, nowhere near 100%, because there's just certain things that they can't control. There's certain things that are not controllable. And the last dynamic is this one between solo and social. And so when I think of mindfulness, I think it has a very personal aspect to it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is it really is up to you to develop your character. You can't rely on anybody else to develop your character, to give you fortitude and mental resilience. That's something you have to do on your own. So being mindful solo or individually is very important. But we also want to focus on how are we mindful with one another, because ultimately it's not about us. It's about everyone, and it's about working in teams. So instead of you and your own character, when we talk about social mindfulness, we're talking about culture, shared habits. Okay, probably the biggest thing that I emphasize throughout this entire series is that even though we're looking at these kind of dynamics like mind and body, that doesn't mean that they work in conjunction or similarly the same way all the time. And one of the biggest things that I've learned over my time studying mindfulness is that there is sort of this progression of how we experience things, and really it's body first. I call this kind of like the mindful pathway. So we have a predictable process for how we experience things, how we interpret them, and how we respond to them. Viktor Frankl, who famously wrote a book about his experience in concentration camps, and he survived for years. And one of the things he mentioned is that what he finally discovered was that he had control over how he responded. And so his kind of similar to this pathway, his was stimulus, space, and response. And he said between the stimulus and our response is space for us to decide how we're going to act, because somebody can do something to us, but that doesn't determine how we respond. And so that space that Viktor Frankl talks about, that's kind of that mindful space. And so building upon this is where we kind of sit today for this session, is we have this overall model of mindfulness, which is built on body, moving to brain, moving to behavior. Today, we're going to talk about solo mindfulness. And from a body perspective, we're going to talk about sensation. How do we experience sensations in our body? Then, after we experience these sensations, how do we interpret them in our brain into our story or stories? And then finally, from the behavior standpoint, what is our style? I use the word style. There's this model that I use called social style, which is a behavioral model, which talks about your recurring behavioral habits. We're not going to talk too much about social style directly, but I take that style word from that model just to be a sort of filler point for your behavior. When you act certain ways, so maybe you're the person who's late to all your meetings, or maybe you're somebody who's the most prepared and you always have a detailed agenda for your meetings, you create these kind of habits and expectations. People can predict how you're going to behave in certain situations. That becomes quote unquote style. Okay, so let's go with this. We're going with this middle row here, solo mindfulness, sensation, story, style. We'll start with the body, with our sensations. So the principle for this part is that emotion creates emotion. And for many people, emotions happen to you. You get an unexpected call from a friend, and it makes you happy. Or you receive some bad news about a family member's health and it makes you anxious. The point is that for many people, emotions are outside of their control. In other words, emotions happen to them. But emotions are much more complex than that. Certain things can certainly make us feel certain ways, but we have a lot of control over our emotions. So the key to understanding this lever of sensations is that it doesn't happen at the mind level. It happens at the body level. This is not a thinking lever. This is a physical lever. So the most effective way that we have of managing our emotions is with our bodies. Our bodies love movement, and through movement, we can change our emotions. There was this really fascinating study that was done, and in part one of the study, they had participants come in, and they asked them to feel a certain emotion. So we want you to feel anxious, or we want you to feel sad, we want you to feel angry. And they had these participants feel this emotion, and then they measured how they were breathing. And eventually they came up with these breathing fingerprints or breathing identities. So each emotion had a certain breath pattern to it. In a separate setting, they had a separate group of participants come in, and this time they reversed it. This time they said, we're going to give you a specific breathing pattern, and we want you to breathe this way for a certain amount of time, and then we want you to tell us what you're feeling. And what happened is all these participants who did these certain breathings, so the person who breathed the sad breathing pattern, the person who breathed the happy breathing pattern, they all reported feeling the emotion that was tied with this breath. And so what the study suggests is that through your breath, you can control to a great extent, not completely, but you can control to a great extent your emotions. And so let's get practical here. What does that mean? So what this means is that in terms of a practice, so the principle is that motion creates emotion. The practice is that you should establish a routine. So this is, anyone know who is in this picture here? Any guesses? All right, so no LSU fans out here. I get it. It's cool. This is Les Miles. He's the former coach of the LSU football team. And he became pretty famous for this habit that he had. So before the football games, he would reach down and he would grab some of the grass in whatever stadium it was in. Usually if it was a real turf. I don't know if he did it if it was artificial turf. But he would grab the grass and he would eat it. And they asked him, why are you doing that? And he said, well, it reminds me that, we're all connected. And so even though I'm facing an opponent today, we're not that separate. We're all, battling here on the same grounds. We all have the same experiences. So it just reminds him of the connection, even with his opponent and their players. But you'll see professional athletes, you'll see professional performers, anybody who has a routine. If they're about to perform, they have some sort of established routine. And sometimes it looks weird. Like you see these baseball players up there and they're tapping themselves and they're fiddling with their glove for the 14th time. And you're like, is that going to help you hit the baseball? And for them, the answer is yes, absolutely. It's not because of anything specific, right? It's not because their glove is on too tight and they're trying to loosen it. It's not because their bat is, doing something strange and they need to hit it with something. What they're doing is they're getting into control. They're getting into, if this is something I do hundreds of times, thousands of times, if I do it the same way, I can recreate that calmness that I had when I was practicing this. So even though I'm feeling nervous right now, I can change that. I can make myself feel calm through establishing a routine. Okay, so let's go into our first breakout room. We will go into, let me get back to that. All right, we'll go into a breakout room, and for 5 minutes, what I want you to share with your partner or group is, what routines have you established to help control your emotions? So maybe, you're somebody who does a lot of speaking and you have this kind of speaking thing that you do, that like vocal training that you do beforehand. Maybe you're a dancer and there's a certain thing physically that you do. But what is something that you face routinely that maybe makes you nervous or makes you scared? And then what's a routine that you've developed to help you manage those routines? So just so you know, I don't think I mentioned this last time before we went to the breakout rooms. So we are recording this session, but when you go into your breakout room, nothing is recorded in your breakout room. And so feel free to share whatever you want in your breakout room. And then when you come back, I will ask if anybody has anything to share. But you certainly don't have to share anything if you don't want to, but feel free to share whatever you like in your breakout room because that's a safe space. Okay. All right. So it looks like everyone's back. So if anyone would like to share, yeah, feel free. What type of routines do you establish for helping you control your emotions?
I'll go.
Sure.
Okay. Basically, I have a lot of anxiety. And so I live by routine pretty much. I have to have some flexibility built in because that'll be even more anxiety provoking. But as long as I have my routines, daily routine, then I have less anxiety. And if I don't have those routines and I can't keep up with what's going on, then the anxiety causes it, the breathing. I'm breathing erratically. I'll be holding my breath and not realize it if I'm really stressed. And when I have routine, then that helps me control. So which controls which? The emotion, they seem to be conjoined.
Well, I love your point. So, you know, it doesn't have to be right before you do something specific like a golf swing or something. It could be a daily routine. Yeah, absolutely. That can help set you up. And so it might be for you in the morning. It might be for somebody else, like a really structured sleep routine that helps them, you know, get settled in. But yeah, exactly. I do think that what you're doing and the actions that you're taking does help to regulate your, you know, your nervous system. So great. Does anybody else want to share?
I was just going to say I do a lot of breathing. I also do presenting, and so it makes me nervous to do that. And so I just do a lot of breathing right beforehand and like really deep kind of, you got this, pump yourself up. So mine's mostly breathing though.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I talked about it last time. You know, I will talk about it throughout the series. I'm a huge fan of breathing. It's sort of one of the core principles of yoga is breathing. So we will talk about breathing a lot. I'm a huge advocate of it. Anyone else want to share?
So for before tests or presentations on my drive to school, I'll like jam out to some of my favorite songs just to put me in a good mindset. And then walking into the classroom, like I'll stretch and like make myself like open up. And I feel like that helps calm me down and kind of get in the zone to take the test.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked last week about the power posing, you know, and like maybe during your test, you know, doing your power pose. So yeah, I love that. I was sharing with Sarah that my my kind of go-to is I like EDM dance videos on YouTube. And so yeah, anything like really, really high energy will pump me up before something. All right, so great. Let me go back to my presentation here. All right, so we've talked about sensation. Now let's talk about story. So the principle for this section is where there's stress, there's a story. And so my friend Grace, who we hope is able to come help facilitate some of these other sessions here, she has some questions that she's outlined in her book, Mindful Relationships, about kind of how do you understand what your stories are. So what this means is that when you're feeling stressed, there's something that's operating there that's kind of unique to you. So as an example, her questions are, you know, where did this story come from? Is this my story or someone else's story? Is this story true of me now? Is this story contributing to or undermining my happiness? And do I choose to continue to live this story, or is it time to write a new one? You know, so, you know, getting back to this kind of principle here is, you know, stress is pretty unique to us. So we can experience something that causes different reactions in us. So if you think about that pathway, if you think about these children here, they're all experiencing the same thing. They're all in the same ride, and you can see, there's one person who's kind of in the middle there, and he's not too happy about what's going on. We have somebody on the right side who is pretty thrilled about what he's experiencing, and it looks like the young lady there is like, okay, I've been here, done that. Like this is really no sensation for me. So what some people find stressful, other people find exhilarating. And so it's based on these stories that we tell ourselves. Like this kid in the middle, he's thinking he might die, or something bad is going to happen. Whereas this other kid is thinking, this is like the best day of his life. And this young lady is probably thinking about something else. I don't think she's engaged really with the ride. She's just like, what's going on later on? So they're all experiencing the same thing, but they're telling different stories. And so the challenge that can happen sometimes is that we will act based on a story that's a false assumption. So let's say, for instance, somebody cuts us off. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but it's happened to me before where, somebody's like cut me off in traffic, and I like speed around them and I pull up beside them, and then I realize it's like my neighbor. And I'm like, oh, but all of a sudden, because it's my neighbor, now the person didn't do anything wrong. They must have just been in a hurry like I am. And so, I have this false assumption that, is automatically negative about this person's story. And that can be scary when I'm acting on it. Okay, so we're going to break back up to our groups again, just for a little bit shorter time, maybe 3 or 4 minutes this time. And this is what I want to want you to discuss amongst yourselves is, what's something that repeatedly triggers stress for you? So maybe it's your roommate doesn't do the dishes, maybe it's your boyfriend doesn't take out the trash, but pick something that happens consistently, not the once a year when I go to see my cousins, we get in this argument. That's too infrequent. Pick something that happens to you either daily or weekly at the longest. And so what's something that triggers stress for you? And then what are you afraid of? Like why do you think it triggers so much stress in you? What is that false assumption that's creating this fear behind you maybe acting not the best in response? Okay, so let's break up into our groups. 3 to 4 minutes. What's something back? So as usual, anyone want to share what kind of triggers you, and what do you think is the underlying assumption behind why you get stressed out about these things?
I find it difficult. I think you asked great questions there. I was saying how sometimes I find myself having what I'll call a wave of anxiety, and I'm like, oh, and I think, what's underneath that? What triggered that? And I don't have the answers.
Yeah, totally understandable. Part of being mindful and having a mindful approach is just asking these questions consistently, and seeing over time if you can come up with some, sometimes these things, they don't come to us. And, because if they did, we would never have any problems, right? But sometimes it just takes experience, and over time you might figure something out. Yeah, and so like this is a good question just to ask yourself. So like I'll just share a personal example for me. So something that really kind of stresses me out is if I ask my kids to do something and they act like they didn't hear me. So like I ask them to do something and they don't do it. And so I'm less concerned because I can do it. I can clean up that plate, or I can move this thing over. That's not a big deal. What I'm concerned about, what makes me scared, is that they're going to not respect authority. They're going to go off to college and not listen to their professor. So I'm nervous that if they don't listen to me, they're not going to listen to other people that they need to listen to. But that doesn't happen. Like just that one little act doesn't make it happen. So I just have to remember, like, okay, you know what? It's fine. Like this one time, it's fine. I just have to make sure I'm looking at a theme here, and not reacting to every single thing that happens. Okay, so we talked about body, i.e. sensation. We talked about brain, story. So now we're going to get to our last part, which is behavior or style. So the principle here, and I love this saying, the principle here is that you are what you repeat. So, we've often heard that saying, you are what you eat. But from a behavioral standpoint, you are what you repeat. A lot of people at OU HSC, OU medical system, they are familiar with this thing called StrengthsFinder. And StrengthsFinder is a diagnostic tool that you use to try to identify your strengths. And what it comes down to is strengths are not necessarily things that you are better at than other people. Your strengths are things that you repeatedly do over and over again. And I remember one time reading this book about career advice. And there's so many books out there or advice out there that tries to tell you, well, find what you're passionate about, find what your calling. And I really like this book's approach. And they said, well, you don't need to do all that. All you really need to do is figure out what is it that you actually do. And so I think a lot of us spend a lot of time trying to figure out what we should do or what we're supposed to do, and not enough time just looking at ourselves and saying, well, what is it that I do? If I always spend my time organizing my room, maybe I should be somebody who organizes things in a workplace. If I'm somebody that likes to tell people what to do, maybe I should find a job where I'm able to coach people and kind of encourage them to do things differently. So you are what you repeat. And I think we should get a little bit more into the habit of embracing that. So partly I just wanted to include this picture. Look at these guys. I mean, they look great. They're doing great. So I'm really into like blue zones and people living long, healthy lives. But I just want to include this here to talk about this idea that awareness of what we like to do is more important than willpower. Like just wanting to be healthy when you're older. You may go online and find these YouTube videos about working out, about running, about doing all these things that maybe that's not your thing. But it looks like for these guys, they found their thing. They like to play basketball. So, they're playing basketball and it's working for them. So find what works for you. You don't have to be any certain way. These guys don't have to do what we think of as older people activities like gardening or walking. They're playing basketball and they're doing great. Okay, so this last question I have for you all is a question I often ask people, and that is, are you funny? So wait, I got to get back to view here. Let's have a show of hands here. Let me ask the question. Are you funny? Let's see. All right, Ashley's funny. Okay, all right, so just Ashley. All right, so Ashley, let me ask you a question. Says who?
Says me. And other people.
Well, is there anybody else besides you who thinks you're funny?
Yeah, I have other people in my life, coworkers, friends, family members.
Okay, well, good. So obviously I have a picture here. Let me go back to my picture real quick. I have a picture here of Gerry Seinfeld. And I mean, he's kind of famous for, I think he just released a book called Is This Anything? So, I mean, he is a comedian, a professional comedian. And one of the things that he struggles with is he doesn't really know if something's funny. And so what he says is like the ultimate test is you got to go and you got to tell these people these jokes. And the people will tell you whether or not it's funny. I can't, even as a professional comedian, I can't tell you what's funny because I think everything's funny. That's Gerry talking. He's like, if it came from me, of course I think it's funny, but that doesn't mean it's funny.
So what I hear you saying is what you're really asking is, do you make people laugh?
Well, exactly, Kay. So that's the real question. The real question is not, are you funny? The real question is, do other people think you're funny? Yeah, so, the reason I have this kind of stuck in this section here about behavior is, you may think, as an example, that you're kind. You may think that you have a short temper. You may think all kinds of things about yourself. And that's fine, and it helps you to assess some things about yourself, but that's really not important. What's important is, do other people think you're kind? Do other people think you're self-centered? Do other people think you're anxious and stressed all the time? So we have a final exercise, and I will tell you, this one is a little bit more intense than the other ones. So I will say, just take it for what you can. And you know what, maybe in this one, Sarah, maybe you can go into a group too, because I want to pair you into pairs of 2. And here's what I'd like you to do. I'm gonna, or I hope Sarah can do this. Sarah can put you in pairs, so you'll have just 2 of you. And then whoever has the shorter hair, we'll say that's partner A. And it looks like I can't tell how long all of your hair is, so you just have to, you can fix another proxy if you want. But one person will be partner A, and one person will be partner B. And this is what I would like you to do. For not too long, for let's say 3 minutes. You'll have 3 minutes in your pair. The first minute, I want partner A to share with partner B something that's kind of a tension that you're dealing with. So a problem that you're dealing with. Now, this can be a personal problem, but if you don't feel comfortable sharing a personal problem, share a professional problem. Maybe you have an issue with an HR policy, or maybe you have an issue with one of your team members. So the partner A will share for 1 minute, and then for the rest of the 2 minutes, there will be a dialogue between partner A and partner B. Okay, so we'll do that for 3 minutes. Then you'll switch roles. Okay, you'll switch roles, and then partner B will share something that's causing tension in your life, and then for the remaining 2 minutes, you'll have a dialogue. Okay, so it's 6 minutes total. 3 minutes focused on partner A's tension, and then 3 minutes focused on partner B's tension. Okay, so after your 6 minutes, we'll come back and I'll give you some further instructions, because we'll have another part to it after that 6 minutes. All right, so I was going to put you, the next step of this process, I was going to put you back in your breakout rooms, and then what you were going to do is you were going to share. So partner A was going to share not more about their tension, but they were going to share what their perspective of in terms of how partner B engaged in dialogue with them. And then partner B would have done the same thing. So as an example, it would have said something like this, like, hey, Sarah, thank you for listening to my tension. I noticed that after I explained my tension, you were offering me some solutions. So, it seems like your tendency is to help fix things, or it might have been, Reagan, thanks for listening to me. I noticed that after you listened, you were opening up more space to see if I had anything else to say. So maybe your tendency is to reflect and help me hear more about myself. And so, I didn't want to give you too many prompts on exactly, so this exercise wasn't exactly about the person sharing their tension. It was a way for you to try to see how you naturally respond when somebody shares a concern. So if you want to look more into this, there's this process called humble inquiry. And so humble inquiry is this process where somebody shares a tension or a problem with you, and there's some very specific ways that you respond to them in order to keep the focus on them and them helping to flesh out their thinking a little bit more. And so if we had more time, we can do another exercise about humble inquiry, but look that up a little on your own, and it's really, really a great exercise to try. Okay, I'm gonna bring it on home here. So today's session was about solo mindfulness. And as you reflect upon the exercises that we did today, I just want you to ask yourself, when it comes to sensation, how do you experience the sensation of someone supporting you or helping you to find solutions to your issues? If you think about this last exercise that we just did. So it was very likely that when your partner was engaging in dialogue with you, that you experienced something. And then what story did that create in you? Was it oh, this person's sounding like my mom, or oh, this person sounds like my best friend? You kind of make a story about this person's communication with you, and then how do you respond to that? Maybe it kind of shut you down, or maybe it was like, oh, this is a breath of fresh air, and I feel like I can share more about this. And so this was just an example going through this kind of mindful pathway from a personal perspective of solo mindfulness. So here's my contact information. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, talk more about these types of things, I love talking about these things.